Today's lesson is a combination of 12.1 and 12.2. It is adding fractions with like denominators. The objective is that you will use models and computation to add fractions with like denominators. And a friendly reminder that when we're talking about like denominators, we're talking about our bottom number. And a like denominator means we're talking about two different fractions that are going to have the same bottom number. First problem we're looking at says, Megan is working on a community mural. She paints 3/8 of her wall green and 4/8 purple. How much of the wall has she painted so far? Well, in your notes, I would like for you to go ahead and draw the bar that you see here. Notice that my bar is separated into 8 parts because I know that the fractions that I'm looking at both have a denominator of 8. When it says in all, it's kind of my hint that it's going to be an addition problem. Well, I'm going to have 3/8 of the wall that she's painted green. We're adding that to the 4/8 that she is painting purple. So I'm going to start by coloring these in. So there's the first 3, and then we continue to color 4 more for this last part. So I end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the total 8 that are colored in. So 7/8 of the wall is painted. But I didn't need to include the bars, but it's a great visual. If you have not already written down this with your bar, please do that. Right. The simplest way, just like when we were comparing fractions, if our denominator was the same, it was very easy for us to compare our fractions. Well, same thing with adding and subtracting fractions. When I have the denominator that is the same, all I have to do is add the top 2 numbers. I will never add my denominators because I'm not making more parts here. So there's only 8 total parts. I will keep my denominator the same, which is why it's still an 8 over here, and I will add the top 2 numbers to get 7. So for this one, our answer was 7/8 of the wall was painted. In your notes, I want you to include this vocabulary. Simplify, which means to write in its smallest form. Go ahead and include the question that you see on here too that says, can you divide the numerator and the denominator by the same number? I also want you to have this example so that we can talk about this as well. We simplify fractions to get them into the smallest possible fraction that they can be. We do that to simplify, you always will divide. With division, you have to think about what numbers will go into both the top and the bottom number, so the numerator and the denominator. We did this when we were finding equivalent fractions as well. So 1/6 plus 1/6 would equal 2/6. Well, if I have the fraction 2/6, there's both an even number in the top and the bottom, so I automatically know I can divide by 2. I always have to divide that 2 by both the top and the bottom number, and again, I have to use the same number on top and the same number on bottom. And I end up with the fraction 1/3. 1/3 would be what we call simplest form because you can't get any smaller than 1/3. Again, please make sure you have all of that included in your notes. The next problem we're looking at says, Mark is baking banana bread and muffins for a neighborhood street party. He uses 2/5 of the bag of walnuts for the banana bread and 1/5 of the bag for the muffins. How much of the bag of walnuts does Mark use all together? Well, again, all together gives me a clue that I know that I'm going to be adding. Well, in your notes, you don't need to have the whole problem, but I do want you to include the fractions. So he's using 2/5 of the bag of walnuts for banana bread, and he's using 1/5 for the muffins. The question is asking how much of the bag of walnuts is he using total. So I'm going to have to add these two together. Again, when I add fractions and they already have the same denominator, that will remain the same. So I can go ahead and write that in my final answer. Then I have to add the top 2 numbers. So 2 plus 1 would give me 3/5 bag of walnuts. Now, when I'm looking at this 3/5, I have to see if I can simplify. So I think to myself, is there any number that goes into both 3 and 5? So can I divide 3 and 5 by the same number and make it a smaller fraction? I almost immediately know that I can't. So therefore, 3/5 cannot be simplified any further. We're going to do some problems together, and we're going to actually practice simplifying as well. So I want you to go ahead and write 1 through 6 in your notes right now. So looking at number 1, we have 2/4 plus 1/4. Again, denominator is the same, so that's going to remain a 4. So all I have to do is add my top 2 numbers, 2 plus 1, and I get 3. Again, I check to see if I can simplify. There's no number that I can divide into both 3 and 4 evenly, so I leave it as it is. So looking at number 2, again, denominator's the same, and for these ones that we're working with today, all of our denominators will stay the same. So the denominator will stay the same in my answer, so I add 1 plus 2, which is 3. Well, we learned that any number, or any fraction that has the same number on top and the same number on the bottom is equal to 1. Hopefully you already wrote that down and you remember that from our previous lesson. Number 3. Again, denominators are the same. So in my answer, the denominator will stay at 12. So I go ahead and write that down. And then I look at the other two numbers. 4 plus 2 would give me 6. Well, I'm looking at 6/12, and again, the first thing I ask myself when I simplify is, does the top number go into the bottom number? If it does, I can just divide by that number, and I can automatically get to my smallest fraction. Well, if you know your facts really well, you probably instantly knew that 6 goes into 12. So that means I can divide both the top and the bottom by 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1, because any number divided by itself is always equal to 1. 12 divided by 6 would give me 2. So on this one, the final answer would be 1/2. The 1/2 would be what we would call simplest form. If you left it as 6/12, you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. You just wouldn't be following the instructions completely. Because if you remember at the very top, it says to simplify if possible. Well, it was possible to simplify, so we do need to take care of that. Well, let's try the next one. 1/10 plus 4/10. Again, denominator stays the same. I add 4 plus 1. On that one, it gives me 5. If I know my facts, I know that 5 goes into 10, so on this one I would automatically be dividing by 5 to give me, again, the fraction of 1/2 as my new simplified fraction, which would be simplest form. In your notes, I would like for you to complete 5 and 6 and have them ready to share. Again, you should have 1 through 6 already written down and ready to go as well, but complete 5 and 6.